Hey, Rosie, Frank. Yeah, I wanted to get back with you on what we talked about yesterday. I wanted to see this video. Hopefully I can get it to because I haven't had luck with the past in the past with sending long videos. So hopefully, keep this short. I may have to break it up and send it to you that way, but hopefully I can send it, get it out to you. But I wanted to get back with you both because that with that passage we talked about. And one of the things we talked about Matthew is 23. Specifically, we was looking at like I think from the 8th verse, and it says, "But do not be called rabbi, for one is your teacher, and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your father, Father, he who is in heaven. Do not be called leaders, for one is your leader, that is Christ. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted." There's several things that I want to point out to you on this passage. One is when you're doing biblical interpretation, like what they teach us in seminary, Bible college, for me, Bible college, seminary, what they teach us is that when you interpret a passage, you have to, there are certain interpretive keys that come up during the passage to help you interpret that passage. In this passage, there's an interpretive key at the beginning, and you see verse in chapter 23, right there in that first verse, it says, "Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples." The word "then," that's is what we call interpretive key, because it alerts us, the reader, and when you interpret scripture, that there is something that happened before that particular passage that is key and has bearing on what's coming up now. So when you're interpreting that, you never want to miss that, because if you miss that, then you want to wind up probably taking it out of context, because you're taking it out of the broader situation in which it occurred. So when we look at that, we say, "Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples." So why does it say then? What is it referring to? So when we go back, what we have to do, we have to go back, and really it goes all the way back to chapter 21. It says, "When they had approached Jerusalem, had come to Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find a donkey there and colt with her unto them, and tie them to me, and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you should say to the Lord, he has need of them." Okay, so we see that happen. These are things that will happen in chapter 21. Then go down to verse 12. In chapter 21, it says, "And Jesus entered the temple." That's key. Jesus entered the temple and drove out all those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. So before that event that we were looking at, Jesus had, the day before, Jesus entered the temple. That's when, the famous, when he entered the temple, turned over the table and said, "Hey, it is written, my house should be called a house of prayer, but you are making a robber's den." So Jesus went to the temple, threw at the table, made the rope, was beating people, throwing them out of the temple, said, "Hey, you're making the shambles of my father's house." Okay, that was, chapter 21. Then it goes on, it say, verse 18, "Now in the morning, when he was returned to the city," so he became hungry. Okay, that's when he was, returned to the city. But we jump down to 23. It says, "When he entered the temple." So first day he went to the temple, he threw all things out. The next day he went back to the temple. It says, "When he entered the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came to him while he was teaching and said, 'By what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you authority?'" So we see, okay, so he goes to the temple that first day. Second day, he goes back to the temple, okay? He goes back to the temple, and then they say, who does he meet? The chief priests went up to him, the elders, and they came up to him, they asked him questions. So what happened was they started asking him questions. He was in the temple teaching. And so, and then verse 26, it said, "But if we say, let me see, Jesus said," chief priests, in verse 23, said they came to him and said, while he was teaching, because he was in teaching, and they said, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?" Jesus said to them, I will also ask you one thing, if you tell me, I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Okay, we jump down to 27. And answering Jesus, they said, we do not know. He also said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. So then he goes on, and he goes on because they keep asking, they're asking questions. Jesus gives some parables and so forth. Then he goes, and we go to verse 45, chapter 21. It says, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was speaking about them. Okay, when they sought to seize him, they feared the people because they considered him to be a prophet. Now remember, he's still in the temple. He's still in the temple. The chief priests ask him questions. He answers them, and they get mad because, he starts a parable. He's talking about them, the chief priests, and they get mad, but they can't do anything because the people, they're afraid the people, will turn on them. Okay. Then we go jump to chapter 22 and verse 15. It says that then the Pharisees went and plotted together how they might trap him and what he said. So we got the chief priests, we got the Pharisees. Now we got the Pharisees coming up. They jumped up and said, hey, what he said, they want to trap him. Okay, so they started asking the question. And then verse 16, chapter 22, and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, teacher, we know that you are truthful. You teach the way of the true God in truth, and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any. Okay, tell us then, what do you think is it lawful to give, the poll? So they're asking Jesus, questions. They got the Pharisees, chief, because they're trying to trap, they're trying to trip him up. Of course they can't. So Jesus answers the question. And then verse 22, after he answered the question, it says, and hearing this, they were amazed and leaving him, and they went away. Okay, now remember, he's still in the temple. And what precipitated, he's in the temple. The chief priest came up to him. The Pharisees came up to him. And then he answers them. Verse 23, chapter 22, on that day, some Sadducees who say there is no resurrection came to Jesus and questioned him. So again, we got the chief priest, we got the Pharisees, we got the Sadducees. He's in the temple. He's teaching. Jesus getting his teach on. He's getting his preach on. He's answering questions, man. Every time they send him questions, he's knocking them down. Bam, 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 man. He's just rolling. Jesus, he's in that preaching mode, that teaching mode, and they try and trip him up, but they can't. Of course, because he's Jesus, right? But he's still in the temple. The Sadducees come up to him. They ask him a question. Jesus answered them. Okay, verse 34, chapter 22. But when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered themselves together. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him. Teacher, which is the great commandment? Okay, so again, here we go again. The Pharisees, you got the chief priests, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they all trying to, trip up Jesus. He's in the temple teaching. Now, the first, right, that day before, he went in throwing everybody out, showing his authority. He comes back, he's teaching, showing his authority again, because he's just, again, he's knocking them down. Bam, bam, he's answering questions, and they can't trip him up. So, verse 41, chapter 22, it says, now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them a question. So Jesus started asking them a question. Verse 46 goes, say, no one was able to answer him a word, nor did anyone dare from that day on to ask him another question, because here they are, they was asking him all day, they trying to trip him up, they trying to, and Jesus he's answering bad, they ain't got nothing to say, boom, 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 he just bad, what I mean, he's just, like I say, he's in his bag right now, he's teaching, he's preaching, and verse 46 say, hey, from that day, hey, they just stopped asking, hey man, we can't answer that question, but then it goes to 23, it goes where it said, then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and observe, but do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. There you go, right there. Bam, that's a key thing. Jesus has been all day. Like I said, the first day he went in, he overthrew the table. Second day he came in, he's preaching. They asking him questions. The scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, chief priests, they're trying to trip him up. Jesus is knocking them down. Bam, 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 bam. He answers the question, shuts them up, shut their mouth. Then he comes out and says, hey, you know what? Now Jesus is, Jesus is like, hey, you know what? Look, all these scribes, Pharisees, look, y'all, look, do what they say. Because they do know the law. They've been trained in the law. So when you got questions on the law, yeah, you go to them. But don't do what they do because they're hypocrites. And so, and then he goes on. He goes on all the way. So again, that's the context. That's important. The context that he's saying what he's saying. He's in the temple. He's been dealing with the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, these hypocrites all day long. He's been knocking them down, answering their questions. Then he says, hey, look, they hypocrites. Then he goes on. He says, but hey, do that deed. He said, hey, verse 6. He says, they love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats in the synagogue, and respectful greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by men. And respectful greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by men. But do not be called rabbi, for one is your teacher. One is your teacher, and you are all brothers. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your father. He is one in heaven. Do not be called leaders, for one is your leader, that is Christ. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled. Whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Then he goes on, but woe to you scribes and you Pharisees, you hypocrites. Again, that's the context. You cannot take this passage out of that context. Jesus is in the temple. They've been questioning him, trying to trip him up. Now at the end, he done shut their mouth. Now he's getting ready to set them straight. Now he's getting ready to set everybody, say, yeah, these people, these scribes, these Pharisees, these chief priests, let me expose them for who they are. They're hypocrites. And he's like, my disciples, don't be like that. Don't go around, in the crowd and be all, wearing things and want to be called, people calling you all about, these titles and stuff like that, because that's what the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all them did. So Jesus was doing a contrast. So when he was saying these things, he was talking about the religious leaders of that day. So when he said, Frank, when he went to talk about the fathers, and I sent you that thing that I took from the my commentary, that he was because they like to be called father by their proselytes. When they would get a Jewish proselyte, somebody that was converting to Judaism, or they had disciples, because they had disciples too, they would call their teachers father. And Jesus was saying, look, don't call nobody your father, because you only got one father. But he was talking about in the ministry. Again, you can't take it out of context. He was talking to them. He's been in the temple all day. He's been battling. Well, they've been battling. He ain't been battling. He's just been, being God. But but he's been with them all day. And now he's laying them straight. He's laying them out. And he's exposing them. That's why he got all this. When you go from 13 all the way, whoa, these scribes and Pharisees, woe, these scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Verse 14, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Verse 15, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Verse 16, woe to you, blind guys. Verse 17, you fools and blind men. So he goes on. He's laying them out. Again, you can't take this out of context. Who is he speaking to? He's in the temple. Who is he talking about? He's talking about the religious leaders of that day. So everything he says has to be taken within that context. You cannot take it out of that context. If you do, like we say, in seminary, you take it out of context, then you take it out because you got a wrong interpretation. You say a text, well, we like to say a text without a context is a pretext. You take it out of context. It's just like if you and Rose having a conversation. Say y'all been talking for about 30 minutes. Y'all talking about your favorite movie or series on TV, right? I come in about the halfway point on that conversation, and I hear y'all talking. I'm like, what y'all talking about? Who killed who? Who? Frank, you killed somebody. Rose, what's up? And y'all gonna look at me like I'm crazy. Be like, what you talking about? We talking about our series. You coming in on the middle of a conversation, taking things out of context. We talking about our series on Chicago Police, which is our favorite. We talking about our series. You coming in the middle, taking all out of context. Well, when we go into a passage and we don't look at it as a whole, and we just take it and lift it up out of the context and the situation that it's in, that's what we do. We taking it out of context. We ignore what's been going on. You can't ignore what's been going on, what that context, why Jesus, what precipitated Jesus to say what he said. So I just wanted to get that to you, relay that to you. Got any more questions, comment? Hey, I love it. I love the Bible. I love getting the word. If you got some more, hey, send it to me, and we can hash it up. You know what I mean? Get to it. But this is, I just wanted to point that out to you because this is a very good passage to show and demonstrate biblical interpretation. Because if you just go with 23, you're probably going to take it out of context. You got to go back to chapter 21 to really understand what led up to Jesus and this conversation that he's having. Okay, I love you both. God bless.